It's nice to be back after 2 weeks, nearly 2 weeks. It's been a very intense period. I've had satsangs and so on every day virtually, plus large crowds of people, 300 or 400 people, and it was very gratifying. This body wasn't well, and I had fever part of the time and had to really struggle. But I managed to get through somehow with Master's grace. I remember Friday in Santa Cruz, no, Wednesday in Santa Cruz, I was really borderline exhaustion, and I was concerned. But I thought, gosh, all those hundreds of people, I've got to do something. So I said, well, Master, you can always inspire me, and just come on, give. And so it worked out fine. As soon as I stood up there, I felt full of energy. And afterwards, however, I made a hasty exit. The two songs we sang today were particularly relevant to this situation. One of them was one I wrote when I was in a car going from McCollumney Hill to Atherton, where my parents lived. And there was a blinding rainstorm, and I had an appointment, and I was getting more and more frustrated at the rain, until finally I realized, well, there's just nothing I can do about it. And so if I can't have good weather outside, I might as well have good weather inside. And as soon as I thought that, this song came to me, and I sort of wrote it down on a piece of paper, the words at least, hoping there wasn't a highway patrolman nearby. And the other song is a good song to remember always, and particularly when you're not feeling well. Life is a dream. Nothing really matters. All the tests we go through, all the difficulties, they're not something to take very much to heart. Everybody's got something. It's just a part of life. But the attitude with which we live is extremely important. And that is the only thing that we'll carry with us after this whole show is over. It won't matter very much to you whether there are thousands applauding what you've done or whether everybody heaps scorn on you. It won't matter. What will matter is what you've taken with you. They say you can't take it with you. Well, it means money, but you definitely do take yourself with you. That's the rub of everything that we ever do. You can't get away from yourself. So you might as well make friends with yourself. You might as well do those things which help you to have a good conscience, which help you to feel at peace with yourself and with others. I went to Carmel from Santa Cruz, and I spent 3 days there with Peter and Catherine and Jyotish and Devi. And well, it was wonderful to get that rest, and boy, did I need it. I remember walking up a very gentle slope, hanging on to Peter's arm like this, and some woman wanted to pass us, so we let her through, and I said, "Don't mind me, I'm just in training for the Olympics." But anyway, Jyotish mentioned something while we were there. We were reading a headline, and it just, I don't know exactly how the subject came up, but he said, I wonder how it is, what pleasure people can find in hurting other people. It is it's an anomaly in life. You don't get any pleasure out of it, but you think, and this is what I think the explanation is. Jean-Paul Sartre said that another person is that which you are not. And it's an affirmation that you're secure when you see other people suffer. Well, in the long run, you suffer too. In the long run, what you inflict on other people, you have to go through. It's just the law. And it's perfectly right, too. It's not that God stands up there like a policeman judging you. It's that you, in yourself, go against a basic rule and reality of life. And what is that? It is that you are a part of everything that is. Master gave us this very good illustration of a gas stove. And you know the little jets that come up, each one looks different, but they're all produced by the same jet of gas. Each one separated simply by the fact that there's a hole through which that particular bit of gas escapes. Now, quite conceivably, somebody could invent something that would filter each of those jets a different color, a different size, a different power, therefore. You could put different powders on them, and so they'd all have different orange, green, blue, and so on. And so they might look even more unique than simply the spatial distance between the gas jets on a stove. And yet, underneath all of that, you know that it's all the same gas. Well, this is what we are. God did not have a bunch of flesh in order to produce you and me. In fact, He didn't have anything to produce you and me. In fact, there wasn't anything at all, period. The Bible says that in the beginning, everything was void, everything was empty. Nothing existed except that one, which is His consciousness. God's consciousness was what He produced this dream out of. And it's literally a dream. It isn't just figuratively. So He dreamed us. The difference between His dream and our dreams at night when we go to sleep is simply that we're a part of His dream. So we're dreaming along with Him. And that's why when you wake up from your own dreams, you're always waking up to the same old dream. Whereas when you go to sleep at night, you don't often have recurring dreams. Sometimes they do, and people say they have some significance. I'm not a student of the subject. But nonetheless, every time you come back to it, it's the same old dream. And yet there's something dreamlike about it. You know, it's interesting because here I live in Italy and I live here. But when I'm buying something, for instance, I bought a little painting in Carmel, a very nice painting. But I had to clearly visualize the distinction between my room there, my little house there, and my little apartment here. Because they're differently set up, they're differently laid out, and I find my mind easily slipping into that dream instead of this dream. I have to clearly remember, no, the living room's there, and little passageway, bathroom, bedroom, dining room, yeah. Then you come here and it's altogether different. So it's still a dream in a way. We all have this consciousness of, it's not wholly real. That's why you find many people say, did I dream that? Is it possible? Was it real? We all have that experience in one way or another, inevitably, because it is indeed a dream within a dream. Our little dreams at night are dreams within the larger dream, but also our little realities are things that we create, but they're only a dream within a much larger dream. And the saints are able to create miracles, as we call them. Really, there's no such thing as a miracle. There's only an operation of a higher law than you or I know. If you were able to be born, or to go back, let us say, 500 years, and tell them about television, or just about any one of the things that we consider so normal to our lives today, they would say that's magic. Why would they say it's magic? For simply one reason. They wouldn't be able to explain it. I remember when I was a child in Bucharest, one of the men, I think it was an RCA who was developing television, visited our home there. And he was trying to explain to me how television would work when it was invented. This was in the mid-30s or a little later. And I, after hearing him out, trying to reason it out and understand it with an open mind, I still couldn't help saying, well, I bet he does it with mirrors. I knew it wasn't so. I knew he must know what he was talking about, but I had to say that it seemed utterly impossible to me. And yet we take it for granted. You know, I was just mentioning to some friends the other day, I read that in 1949, the president, an article appeared, I think it was in Popular Science Monthly or something, one of those big scientific magazines, that said that someday, seemed a fantastic prediction, someday computers will weigh as little as 1 ton. Well, think of it. I can carry mine like this. In 1979, it was, I think, that the president of IBM said that, home computers they'll never happen. 79, it was just about 3 years later that they began happening. And I still don't believe them, but there they are, and I use them. It takes Alan to remind me that it is possible to do something more than just sort of kick it. I belong to the kick it school. Everything doesn't work. But anyway, the miracles that seem so amazing to you and me, like this Neem Karoli Baba, you know his name, many of you. And he was, a friend of mine was in New Delhi, an Indian, and he happened to be driving past somebody, and he saw Neem Karoli Baba standing by a car talking to somebody, and Neem Karoli waved at him, and he waved back, and he thought, well, that's not possible. He's in Mehrauli, that's a town many miles away from New Delhi. And as he came in the door, the telephone rang, and it was Neem Karoli Baba on the other end with the operator saying, you have a call from Mehrauli. And Neem Karoli Baba said, what did you see? What did you see? But you know, these things are not so, they're not strange to the masters. It's just that they don't want to show off, and that's why they don't. And yet they do it quietly. I have to admit, when I read Autobiography the first time, completely changed my life. I got on a bus in New York and came nonstop to Los Angeles. The first words I uttered were words I thought I'd never address to anyone. I said, I want to be your disciple. I was completely won by him as a person, by the inspiration I felt from him. And that was a decision I've never changed for a second. And yet, I have to admit, page 8, somebody materializing in a wheat field, it was a bit steep. I had to put a lot of those things on a shelf. I couldn't disbelieve them. I couldn't believe them. I just figured, well, these things will take care of themselves. I know what I want is his joy, his love, his inspiration. I want what he has. And all this other stuff, it's so trivial anyway. But I did come to see over the years that many of these things just happened around him. He didn't make any show of it. I remember one time Norman and I were working on plastering a building. While he was doing the plastering, I wasn't very competent, so all I did was mix the mud. And yet it was very old cement, and it kept setting up. And I had to keep playing with water to help keep it soft so he could keep on plastering. And just as I had placed a new hod of mud on this board, Master drove by and stopped and called to us. So naturally we came and talked to him, and I was, of course, delighted to talk with him. But in the back of my mind there was this thought that, well, when I get back I'm going to have to take a sledgehammer to that board. So we were there talking to him about half an hour, I guess. When we got back, the mud was soft. It remained soft, never had any more trouble with it. And it was the sort of thing that happened around him all the time. He never called attention to it. It just happened. There were so many wonders that I began to take them for granted. And in fact, I remember one time I was in Beverly Hills bar mitzvah. It was a lot of those Beverly Hills Jews are also psychiatrists, and most of them are atheists, at least as far as I could tell. And so this, I was invited there. I'm not a Jew. Padma calls me an honorary Jew, but it's not my blood. It's just that I was working with her in managing crystal clarity. And I was there because they wanted us to demonstrate the yoga postures. And there's again a little story that I couldn't do the yoga postures very well, but one time I had to demonstrate them with a few others for one of Master's guests. And all of a sudden, I found I could do them all easily, no problem. In fact, from then on, they always chose me to demonstrate the postures. When Norman was new there, he couldn't get into the lotus pose. Master said, all right, do the lotus pose. And no problem. From then on, he could do it easily. So you see, there's something fishy going on. And anyway, I told this psychiatrist, I wanted to convince him, and I didn't know then, I was too young, 23 I guess, and too young to really, inexperienced you might say, to know that there's no gain in talking about these things with people who are skeptics. But anyway, I told him about some cures Master had performed on me and others, and I think that all of the thought in his mind was, could he make an opening for me for an appointment? But anyway, it didn't convince the guy at all. Anyway, often Master would have me demonstrate the postures and serve lunch to his guests, and after lunch he would often have me just sit there and talk with me and give me advice and counseling and so on. And always his counseling, it's interesting, it was never personal, it was all about my helping other people, how to help them and so on. And he said, oh, by the way, when you're with skeptics, don't talk about miracles. I said, you know. I was surprised after all. That was miles away from Mount Washington. He couldn't have known. I'm sure this psychiatrist was not a spy for Master who would come and tell him. And I said, oh, you know about it? He said, I know every thought you think. My God. I mean, if I were the only disciple, I could understand it. If I were seated on the other side of a screen and somebody showed me a picture of a ship, let's say, and I concentrate and concentrate and concentrate, and Master says, I see a tree. Well, a tree is sort of like the mast of a ship, so I can see the experimenter saying, okay, you pass. But there was nothing like that at all. Hundreds of disciples. And I have to assume that he knew the thoughts of all of them. This speaks of a state of consciousness that I don't think very many people have. I've been amazed, in fact, because I've had the opportunity to meet great saints in India and elsewhere also. Some of them lesser, some of them greater, but all of them saintly. I remember when I met Frank Laubach. He was that wonderful Christian missionary who wrote Letters of a Modern Mystic. Wonderful soul. And I met him just shortly before his death and had lunch with him. And he told me at the time, I'm suffering from an incurable disease. And I looked at him with a certain amount of pity or whatever. And he said, yes, old age. Well, that's what I'm beginning to feel. But I expect to be hanging around boring you for a few more years. We'll see. No. I was not fishing. I was projecting. Anyway, I have met many such souls and many masters. I spent much time with Sri Rama Yogi, who Master said was the only one he met out of Autobiography of a Yogi who was fully liberated. He said very few in Autobiography of a Yogi had achieved full liberation, but all of them were inspiring. But I never met anyone whom I could impartially, mind you, as a disciple, I would certainly be loyal, partially, but viewing it impartially too. I've never met anybody on his level. I don't mean a molehill can't judge the relative height of different mountains, but Master had something that was so radiant, so full of joy and love. It was just incredible. Some woman told me she happened to see him in a restaurant. She was just going by. She saw him in the window of a restaurant. She said to her husband, "That has to be the most spiritual face I've ever seen." Many people had that reaction. That was why, when a man comes back, when a soul comes back, that has already achieved liberation, that's when he becomes an avatar. When he comes back with liberation, then he has the power to bring thousands to God. One who is still being liberated or has been just liberated in this life, he only can take a handful. Sri Rama Yogi, whom I was just speaking of, was one such. But all of them were very inspiring. And I believe it's a good thing to spend time with saints. I don't believe it's a good thing to go shopping. I think in the beginning, yes, why not? You go to a store, usually when I enter a store, I see what I want right away. But normally not. Normally people go in and they like to compare and go the length of the counter, as they say, and then decide, well, I like this best of all. I didn't have that. The first thing I ever found out was Master. I didn't know anything. Just a few weeks before, I had poo-pooed the thought of saints. In fact, when I opened Autobiography of a Yogi, and I saw that it was dedicated to Luther Burbank, an American saint, I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. There can't be an American saint. I put the book down. I wouldn't read it. I mean, I was a bit of a hard head. And it was really only I got the Bhagavad Gita then. I didn't know anything from anything. A week before I met Master, I'd never heard the word guru, yoga, you name it, karma. I didn't know any of it. And then I read a book called The Short World Bible, in which it talked about it gave excerpts from the different religions. What I loved about the Indian religion was first that it wasn't tied to a person. Religion can't be that. Religion has to be, truth has to be universal. Nobody can have a market on truth. Nobody should try even. One time in New Delhi, I was giving a lecture to a group of people like this, and at the end somebody asked me some advice. And I thought about him, and I said, well, there's an Aurobindo center here, and I think it would be good if you went there. Now, why did I say that? We had our own center there. It was a perfectly thriving SRF YSS center. I had started it. You'd think I would send him there, but I refused to think in a sectarian way. And I felt that that's where he belonged. And he came to me later, he said, "How do you know I'm a devotee of Sri Aurobindo?" I said, "I don't know, but I felt it." Don't be partial in the sense of somebody who's a merchant selling his wares. Understand that truth is for everybody, but offer it to people. I would not be very impressed if somebody came to me and said, well, there are lots of ways, you can try this if you like. No, I'm enthusiastic about what I believe in, and I try to share it with people. I'm not interested in converting anyone except to his own self, but I'm eager to share what I have experienced and what so many friends of mine have experienced. And so, in the teaching of Master, you find this emphasis on universal truth. And what I found first in that book, The Short World Bible, was that approach. I loved it for its universality. And after all, God is countless galaxies He's produced. Can you really put Him in some little box? It sounds too preposterous even to laugh at. And the other thing I loved about it was, try it. See if it works. This I respected. That it didn't say, wait till you're dead and then you'll find out. That's a little too late for my money. If it works, it ought to do something for you right now. And in fact, that's the beauty of the Hindu teachings. They were all beautiful. I don't mean to put any of them down, but it was so experimental, so cosmic, so full of test it, try it, realize it, experience it. Don't just believe. This is what won my mind. So I remember sitting on a bed in upstate New York. I was trying to earn money so I could go off and become a hermit and seek God, and with enough money saved in some isolated jungle of South America. And I didn't know what I was doing. I'd sit there sort of cross-legged and didn't know what meditation was all about, but I tried. And then when I put my mother on the ship to join my father in Cairo, Egypt, where my father was stationed as a geologist by Esso, and the day I put her on the ship was the day I found Autobiography of a Yogi. And it was the day of my reaction. Oh, it can't be. I was so attracted to that face, but an American saint, ridiculous. I was all set to leave this country, go to India eventually, maybe find what I was looking for there. And I bought the Bhagavad Gita instead, and that's a short scripture. You can read it very quickly. And wonderful teachings, absolutely the greatest I think I've ever encountered. But then I was trying to get on a ship so that I could, on a ship they paid you very well, and you didn't have an opportunity to spend it because you were out at sea. So I thought, well, that's a good way to save money. And so I was on, I think it was 7th Avenue, just about to cross the street to take the subway down to Bowling Green to find out if a ship had come in. And this thought came into my mind very forcefully, you need to read the autobiography. And I thought, I'm spending too much money, I'm much too intellectual, and besides an American saint, And so I was just about to cross the street to get on the subway when what seemed to me an actual power turned me left toward 5th Avenue and forced me, and I began to get excited. I thought, I didn't make this decision. And so I went over to 5th Avenue to the bookstore where I'd seen this thing and bought it, just avidly bought it. And there was a friend in the store from Scarsdale High who I happened to meet in the store, and he was talking about his future dreams of great success in television and so on. And the more he talked, the more I clutched this book to my chest. I thought, oh no, I'm tired of that world. This is the only thing that matters. And I read it just between really laughter and tears. Tears of joy, laughter of greater joy. I took the next bus, as I said, I started with Encinitas, ended up in Los Angeles, met Master, you know the story. But I have to say, I may have made dumb decisions in my life, I don't know, but that was not one of them. That was really the beginning of my life. Now, in his teaching, one of the things that is so beautiful about it is that there is no we and they consciousness. There is no thought of sectarianism, not at all. All are one. He said we are not a sect. I remember Tara Mate and SRF told me, well, we are a sect. Well, we aren't a sect. Ananda isn't a sect. They can do what they like. We aren't a sect. I have often told those who live here, Ananda is not your community. The whole world is your community. we should feel that everybody is our brother and sister. Everybody is a part of us. And when we can have this attitude, I was in the Berkeley Center the other day, and that was where I began this little outing. And there was a young lady there, and I was sort of teasing her, and this other woman said, "Oh, you seem like old friends." I said, "Everybody's my friend." I'd never met her before. But that's how I feel. That's how we naturally feel when we understand that this God, who is here inside us, is also in everybody else. That's the meaning of Namaskar. I bow to the soul in each one of you. We need the attitude. And when we have this thought that I'm separate, then we lose the awareness that their pains are our pains. As John Donne said, no man is an island. We are all united, he said, by the sea. That wasn't a good enough analogy, but it worked. You know what he meant. But this jet analogy of Yogananda's is absolutely perfect. And take it another way. You see, there's this big debate, or I should say disapproval, or whatever you want to say, on the part of Christians and Jews against Hindus and Buddhists. Why? Because they say that that God is the self. How can God be myself? In Christian theology, God is wholly other. Well, what has he got to make us out of except himself? So how can he be wholly other? He has to be a part of us. We have to be a part of him. And the whole illusion of magnitude and smallness is all that, only an illusion. God is neither big nor small. On the other hand, he is infinitely large and infinitesimally small. You can't think of him in spatial terms, but you are just as much important to him as the greatest star, the greatest galaxy. You are he. As in Autobiography, there is one sentence there where it says that it was in the passage of Omar Khayyam, where the God is seeking the soul which has disappeared from the garden. You remember the moon of my delight? And it says, frantic search for this missing soul, lest for want of a pin the universe collapse. I've always been intrigued by that statement because, in fact, I can't imagine the non-existence of a pin meaning anything. And yet, if anything doesn't exist, nothing exists. Everything that exists exists forever. And when you think of eternal hell, for God's sake, you're not thinking. I was just reading about Dante's Inferno, and it's a great poem, everybody tells me. I just can't get into it. The theology is so crooked. It's but the thing is that in that view of heaven and hell, somebody has been around and has suffered for 1,000 years, and oh, what a terrible thing. Listen, 1,000 years, one drop in an ocean, you still don't have an idea of eternity, because a drop is still finite compared to an ocean which is still finite. Eternity is not finite. There is no such thing as time. You've been around as long as God's been around, or you wouldn't be here now. And what does that mean? You've been here for billions of years. Hard to believe, isn't it? And yet it's the truth. There's no passage of time. It's always right now. There is one reality, and it's non-terminating. It just goes on and on and on. Reminds me of somebody listening to a very boring piece of music and saying, it has no terminating qualities. Well, that's what this life is. We keep thinking, well, at the end, it's over. By no means. Master used to love to joke about the average love story, where finally this boy and this girl, after all sorts of travails, get together. And he said that the director hastily snips the film at that point with the crashing chords or whatever, to leave out the rolling pins and black eyes. But life is always going to be an up and down and up and down. And when Mormons speak about being bonded to somebody for eternity, my God. You still? We need variety. And you know, Master said something that I bet you almost every Western reader has overlooked, because it's a bit frightening. But he quotes something of Buddha's, giving as one reason that we should love everybody the fact that in the very long time span of our lifetimes, everybody has been close to you. Now that's a bit frightening. Everybody, and this is only one planet. We've been around, been there, done that. And the truth is that what you begin to feel, and it comes to everybody over a period of time, Master described it as anguishing monotony. Oh my God, not another success, failure. It doesn't matter. What does it matter whether people applaud you or hiss you? It doesn't matter at all. To succeed, to fail. When I started Ananda, many people predicted failure. I said, it just doesn't matter. This is something I have to do. I'm not in it for succeeding. I'm in it because it's something I have to do. I know I have to do it, and I'll do my best. And if I fail, it's okay. But I'm happy to do what I have to do. That's the attitude with which a soldier has to go into battle. I mean, can you imagine a soldier on the battlefield fighting, let's say in the old days with swords? Oh, you hit me! How mean of you! It's just the game. It's what it is. You can't help it. But you know, within all of that, there is this understanding that gradually comes. And it begins with closeness. And this is why families, marriage, friendships, these are important. It's something that people miss who become hermits. And if you're on a level where you can genuinely be a hermit and feel in touch with other people, feel compassion for other people, fine, you've reached that level, you've earned it. But the truth is that we need one another. We need the experiences that people give to us. We need the hardships as well as the joys. There's a lovely story from Saint Therese of Lisieux, when she was the novice mistress, and some of the novices came to her and complained because there was this, there were a couple of old nuns. You know what happens? These people have given everything, given their lives. Toward the end of their lives, they begin to lose their vocation, and they take their sense of frustration and bitterness out on the young ones. And they would wash their clothes in such a way as to splash soap suds in their eyes. And these young nuns said, but we've come here to find God and to get away from all that meanness and so on. Why do we have to have it here in this house of God? A very natural question. Therese said if we didn't have them, it would suit us to go out and find them and bring them. Because we need the experiences of others. And one thing that we need to do is understand that when we feel pain, it isn't just our pain. Other people, this is a potential of mankind. We should feel more compassion for others. This has been one of the beautiful things at Ananda, when people, members of Ananda, have been dying in the hospital, and we've been around for long enough for a few people to have died. In the early years, it looked as if nobody was ever going to die. But this concern that they have shown for fellow patients, for people down the hallway, this kind of thing is something the nurses and doctors are astounded at. But it's a natural thing that comes from living with people whom you recognize as your own family. And you begin to expand that sense of family to include your neighbors. That's why when we had that forest fire and our neighbors were planning to sue the county, which was responsible for the fire of a county vehicle had a faulty spark arrestor. And we wrote to them, I wrote to them, and I said, I know you're concerned because we were the biggest losers, but I said, we're not going to sue. We don't want to take our hard luck out on our neighbors. They're our community too. We may not know their names. They may have other beliefs. They may even hate us because you can't do a good thing in this world without having enemies. It's just the name of the game. But you don't have to hate in return. You can still love. The same God that animates you animates them. And everybody really is looking for the same thing. Nobody wants anger, hatred, disharmony. Nobody wants anything but love, kindness. And if they want cruelty, like little children I saw once, I mentioned to Jyotish in that discussion in Carmel, where they were pulling the wings off flies, and I thought, what a horrible thing to do. But some children do that, and some people do get sadistic pleasure out of hurting other people. But it's only their ignorance. They think what they're doing is affirming what is not a truth, affirming that delusion of Jean-Paul Sartre, which was that to see another is to see that which you are not. To see another person's sorrows, to see another person's joys, is to participate in those joys and sorrows inevitably. And so it is that although it isn't that you will have to wait until everybody in the world wakes up spiritually, but as long as you're conscious of it, at least do your best to help others. I was just reading also today, because this is a book about the Italians, about St. Francis, how when he saw a leper, he got down off his horse and kissed the leper's hand. It takes a lot of faith and love to do such a thing. But to have that kind of feeling for others makes you a friend wherever you go. People feel something and they respond. But that's not what you do it for. What you really are aware of is that God is there too, and God is here, and God is everywhere. And so your joy keeps expanding. We need to understand that everybody is our own self. This is what Swami Shivananda used to write as a salutation at the end of his letters. Your own self, Shivananda. This is a truth, and we should try to live that, so that if what you get, and this is our philosophy at Ananda, if what we gain is hurtful to anyone else, then we aren't gaining. Our gain has to be the gain of others too. This is our very firm philosophy. And the more we have that, don't worry about what other people think. Many will just figure, oh, well, so what's in it for him, you know? Hey, they're cynics. They think that way. Have compassion for them. Because you know one thing, they aren't happy with that attitude. How can you be? I remember, this is a pretty absurd story. In college, I had the usual good time, so-called. And I was having a, quote, good time at a party, drinking rather too much. And there was a man there, and I saw that he was so wrapped up in himself. But being not altogether sober, I didn't know quite how to put it. And I just was weeping with compassion for the guy. And I said, how can you be happy with a face like that? What I really meant to say was with an expression like that. But, well, he saw I was a little under the weather and not quite ready for a bash in the nose, which I deserved. But indeed, you can see it written on people's faces. You can see whether they're joyful or not happy. And even if they'd like this Sri Rama yogi looking into his eyes, he didn't smile. Very little, laughed, never. Very much in himself. But you look into his eyes and you felt so much joy. It was thrilling to be with him. You don't have to put on an air. I remember when I came back to America and I went down to Big Sur. I was looking for a place to live as a hermit, and I'd been thrown out of SRF and didn't know what to do with my life. And I know that I had to stop at a bridge that they were sort of repairing. And so I got out with other passengers, and this guy came up to me, and a young fellow, I'd been in India, I didn't know all the modern terminology, said, "Say man, how can somebody get around the world, how can a cat get around the world without any bread?" I thought, well, I didn't know cats had that much wanderlust. And as far as I knew, they preferred fish to bread. And he talked about this pad he'd been staying out in the forest. And I imagined a mattress under a tree. Turned out somebody explained this to me like this, that he was really talking about a little house or something. Anyway, a house. Anyway, when I got down there, I met the owner of the Big Sur Inn. I forget whether that was the name of it or something similar. Anyway, he was a big bear of a man, and we were talking, and I was mentioning that I felt that I had met maybe 6 people in my life who I felt knew God. I think the number is more close to 20 as I really go back and count it up, but anyway, 6. He put out this bear-like hand and said, "Shake, you just met the 7th. Well, somehow his manner didn't quite convince. Whereas some of these saints don't say anything. Like Anandamayi Ma was walking, and she sat under a tree, and a villager passed and talked briefly with her and liked it, stayed. Somebody else stopped. Somebody went and got the village. The whole village was gathered around her, and she was just there being herself. She didn't say anything much. A few comments, but her comments were always rich with wisdom and much richer with love. And then she got up to leave. They were weeping as if they were losing their own. This is the kind of feeling, the kind of expression that people have the closer they come to that jet underneath the flames. But look at this teaching, that in the West they say, well, God is not myself, I'm me. I had a great sort of insight into this problem recently. I realized that it's all a question of direction. If that jet of gas were conscious, and if it were pointed outward, it would be conscious only of the flame. But if its direction of consciousness were backward, it would be conscious only of the gas from which it came. See how simple it is? When your energy and consciousness are directed toward this outward manifestation, this body, this personality, all these likes and dislikes and habits and responsibilities and so on, then that's you. But if you go back toward your source, you see that it's the same self. That's who you are, and it's who everybody is. And so when you have that, you can't be cruel. It would hurt you even more than the other person, because you would have the sensitivity to know what you had done. We can't be cruel. On the other hand, we cannot be not loving. Like one time, Yogananda was scolding a disciple, and he said, "But Master, you will forgive me, won't you?" Yogananda replied, "What else can I do?" What else could he do? He couldn't see any reason not to forgive him. This is what we want to achieve. Masters are masters. They come onto this planet not to show us how great they were. They come to show us our potential. And the reason we feel so enormously attracted to them is that we know that this is something that we need. This is our potential. This is who we really are. When Dillinger, who was public enemy number 1 back in the 30s, was killed in a shootout with the FBI, they found a note by his body saying, "I have been much misunderstood. Within this body there beats a very loving heart." Public enemy number 1, he'd killed I don't know how many people. And you'd think, well, if anybody would have to admit I'm evil, it would surely be he. But no, he felt that he loved people. Yeah, sure, I mean, these mafiosi capos, they may be a little brutal to a few people, but they have their little brats whom they call grandchildren, and they have some people that they love, yeah. But there is this within everybody. I doubt that anybody could ever really say, I am evil. Because there's something in us that always hopes, that always thinks, this isn't the whole thing. There's a lot more to me that people don't understand. We all know without knowing, conscious but unconsciously, subconsciously, we are walking saints. We are walking children of God, all equally so. And this is the wonderful thing about communities. Above all things of how nice it is to work together and how much more secure you are when you do work together and all those considerations, listen, I couldn't care less. What I feel is important about communities is that it gives people a chance to seek God. It's so hard out there in the world. You find so much hardness of heart, so much meanness, so much attempt to sort of cut you down. But with people who are all trying to become better, all trying to improve themselves, what a great start on the spiritual path. I just thank God every day for what Master has allowed me to create. I don't think about organizations. I don't think about Ananda. I expect thousands of communities around the country. You know, in my book, Hope for a Better World, I talk about communities. It's the cooperative community solution is the way I've subtitled that book. I don't once mention the name of Ananda. God's sake, thousands of Anandas, what a horror. I'd love to see many people, but do it in their way. Or if we have to have thousands of Anandas, let them be autonomous. Let there not be some great central office mandating everything. For God's sake, I've even separated our communities just so that each one can have a little breathing space. Each one should understand that he stands alone before God. As Master told us at Mount Washington, he said, there are many rats and mice living on the property here at Mount Washington. They're not finding God. Many people come here and play the organ and do different things, but they're not seeking God. He said, you have to individually make love to God. Ultimately, it's between you and God, nobody else. Nobody's going to do it for you. Nobody's going to stand on your behalf and, as a lawyer in court, defend you. You're going to have to defend God with one thing only. He's going to ask you a simple question. He's not going to say, are you Yogananda's disciple or this one's disciple or going according to this church or that church? He's going to say, how much do you love me? That's all it's about. Love God and you love everything. Hate anything, and to that extent, you don't love God. Persecute anyone. To that extent, you are deficient in your love for God. When you see God everywhere, you wish well to everybody and do what you can to help others. But above all, you understand that the greatest help you can give anyone is to the extent that he can use you, and therefore your first responsibility is to come close to him. Love God, that's all it's about.